The Summer I Turned Pretty Episode 1, Episode 2, Episode 3, Episode 4 and Episode 5. 5 episodes that didn't just tell a love story. They cracked it wide open and showed the pain, the tension, and the dangerous choices hiding underneath. These episodes weren't just about Belly, Conrad and Jeremiah, they were about how far people will go to protect love, even when it destroys them. Episode 1 set the stage, and you could feel from the very first moment that nothing would be simple anymore. Belly walked back into Cousins, but she wasn't the same Belly we remembered. She wasn't just the girl caught between two brothers anymore. She was a girl who had already seen heartbreak, who had already felt the sting of loss, and who carried scars no one could see. From the second she stepped into the house, the atmosphere felt heavy, like something was pressing down on everyone. Susanna's absence was loud, even though no one dared to say her name out loud at first. That house had always been filled with her warmth, and without it, every corner felt colder. Every silence sharper. Conrad was the first one Belly's eyes found. But the moment they locked eyes, you could tell this wasn't going to be a fairy tale reunion. He was distant, withdrawn, hiding behind that wall he built so perfectly. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, but he wouldn't let anyone close enough to share it. Belly wanted answers. She wanted the truth about where they stood. But Conrad gave her nothing but half smiles and quiet escapes. It was the kind of silence that hurts worse than words. And Jeremiah? He wasn't in the background anymore. His energy was different. He wasn't just the playful, easygoing guy anymore. He had an edge now, like he was tired of standing in Conrad's shadow. Tired of being the one Belly overlooked. Every word he spoke, every time he showed up for Belly, you could feel it. He was ready to claim his place. The love triangle that had always been the center of the story suddenly didn't feel innocent anymore. It felt dangerous. Because it wasn't just about choosing between two brothers, it was about survival. About who was going to walk away whole and who was going to shatter. Belly could feel that tension too, even if she didn't want to admit it. And the worst part? She couldn't stop herself from being pulled in both directions. Every time she looked at Conrad, her heart still ached. But every time Jeremiah stepped closer, offered her comfort, made her laugh, she couldn't ignore the pull. Episode 1 also made it clear that the group itself wasn't as unbreakable as it used to be. The beach days felt shorter, the laughter thinner, and every little argument felt like it could blow up into something bigger. Taylor's presence added another layer, pushing Belly to face parts of herself she didn't want to deal with. Taylor reminded her that she wasn't just the girl torn between two brothers, she was also a girl who had to decide who she wanted to be. And beneath it all, the weight of Susanna's memory pressed down on everyone. No one wanted to talk about her, but she was everywhere, in Conrad's sadness, in Jeremiah's anger, in Belly's guilt. That grief sat like a ghost in the room, unspoken but undeniable. By the time episode 1 closed, one thing was clear. This summer wasn't going to be about happiness. It was going to be about survival. Belly's choices weren't just about love anymore, they were about whether the fragile bond between all of them could survive another hit. The tension was alive, crawling under every word, every look, and every silence. And as the sun set on that first episode, you could already tell what was broken might never be put back together again. Episode 2 picked up with the same heavy energy that closed out the first. If episode 1 was about setting the stage, episode 2 was about tightening the noose, pulling everyone deeper into the emotional mess they couldn't escape. Belly tried to act like everything was normal, like she could balance the tension between Conrad and Jeremiah. But it was obvious normal was long gone. The cracks in every relationship were spreading, and this time, there was no way to cover them up. From the start, Belly's guilt was louder than ever. She was carrying the weight of all her choices. Every word she had said and every promise she had broken. The way she looked at Conrad showed it. She wanted to reach out, to grab him, to pull him back to the way they used to be, but he wasn't giving her that space. He was colder, sharper, retreating behind walls that Belly couldn't climb anymore. It was like every time she thought she found a way in, Conrad pushed back harder. His silence was brutal and his distance burned worse than anger ever could. But Jeremiah? He wasn't letting her slip away. He stepped in, filling every silence Conrad left, answering every question Belly had, giving her the kind of attention she was desperate for. But his closeness wasn't just about caring for Belly anymore, it was about showing Conrad he wasn't the only option. You could feel Jeremiah's determination, the way he made sure Belly saw him, the way he stood beside her like he was daring Conrad to step up or step aside. That shift was dangerous because for the first time, Belly wasn't just caught between two brothers, she was starting to see what life might look like. With Jeremiah at her side, the episode leaned heavy on this triangle. But it wasn't just about who Belly loved, it was about what their love was doing to the bond between all of them. Every glance between Conrad and Jeremiah felt like a fight waiting to happen. And Belly was standing right in the middle of it. She didn't want to choose, but the tension was forcing her closer and closer to a decision. And the worst part? Every choice felt like a betrayal of someone she cared about. The grief over Susanna was another layer they couldn't ignore. Her absence wasn't just sadness anymore, it was anger, it was guilt, it was resentment. Everyone was processing it differently, but instead of pulling them together, it was pulling them apart. Conrad carried the weight like a silent punishment. Jeremiah let it fuel his need to hold on to Belly. And Belly herself couldn't stop wondering if she was honoring Susanna or betraying her memory. By being tangled in this mess, the silence in that house wasn't peaceful anymore, it was suffocating. Episode 2 also showed how fragile their friendships had become. Taylor wasn't afraid to call Belly out, reminding her that she couldn't keep floating between the brothers without consequence. Those conversations cut deep because Taylor wasn't just an outsider, she was Belly's anchor. And hearing the truth from her made Belly face what she'd been avoiding. And yet, even with Taylor's warnings, Belly couldn't stop herself. Every step she took seemed to draw her deeper into a storm she had no way out of. By the end of the episode, the balance was shattered. Belly was still trying to hold onto Conrad, even though he was slipping away faster with every passing second. Jeremiah was standing firm, making it clear he wasn't going anywhere this time. And Belly? She was stuck, torn between her past and her possible future, watching as both brothers slowly started to unravel in front of her. Episode 2 didn't just build tension, it lit the fire. The triangle wasn't just messy now, it was explosive. Every decision Belly made carried weight, every silence from Conrad cut deeper, and every move Jeremiah made only pushed the conflict closer to the edge. The summer that once promised love was quickly becoming a battlefield. And by the time the credits rolled, you knew the storm was just beginning. By the time episode 3 started, it was clear that nothing could go back to the way it was. The house in Cousins wasn't the safe haven it used to be, it felt like a battlefield, with every room holding secrets, arguments, and unspoken pain. Belly walked in each day trying to keep it together, but the truth is, her world was collapsing faster than she could hold it up. The weight of Susanna's absence, the strain of Conrad's distance, and Jeremiah's push to be seen, it was all pressing down at once. And episode 3 made sure to rip those cracks wide open. The first thing you noticed was Conrad's energy. He wasn't just distant anymore, he was unstable, carrying something heavy he refused to share. His moods shifted quick. 1 second he'd look at Belly with that softness that made her fall for him in the first place, and the next he'd shut down completely, shutting her out like she didn't belong in his world anymore. It was brutal to watch because Belly's heart was still tied to him, still reaching out for something that wasn't there. She wanted to believe he cared, but every action said otherwise. Conrad was slipping, and Belly couldn't decide if she should hold tighter or finally let go. Jeremiah saw it too, and episode 3 gave him more space to show who he really was now. He wasn't just reacting to Conrad anymore, he was standing his ground. His moments with Belly were softer, steadier, but also heavier. He wasn't just being the nice guy. He was showing her that he could be the one she needed when Conrad wasn't. Every time Belly cried, Jeremiah was there. Every time Conrad walked away, Jeremiah stayed. That dynamic was shifting, and for the first time, Belly wasn't just seeing Jeremiah as the backup. She was seeing him as someone who could actually be her choice. And that realization terrified her, because it meant betraying Conrad in a way she couldn't take back. The grief that haunted all of them boiled over in this episode 2. Susanna wasn't just a memory anymore, she was a wound, raw, and unhealed. Every conversation circled back to her, whether they wanted it to or not. For Conrad, it made him colder, angrier, desperate to bury his pain under silence. For Jeremiah, it made him fight harder. Not just for Belly, but for the idea of holding onto the family Susanna had wanted them to keep. And for Belly, it made her question everything. Was she honoring Susanna's memory by chasing after Conrad? Or was she destroying the very thing Susanna wanted for all of them? By tearing the brothers further apart? That guilt followed her everywhere, whispering in her ear, reminding her that every choice carried consequences far bigger than just who she kissed. Episode 3 also dug deeper into Belly's friendships. Taylor wasn't letting her off easy, calling her out for letting herself get dragged deeper into the chaos. And instead of brushing it off, Belly felt the sting of every word. Because deep down, Belly knew Taylor was right, she couldn't keep pretending like her actions weren't breaking everyone around her. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two different things. And Belly wasn't ready to face the fallout yet. She was still clinging to the idea that she could fix everything, that somehow she could keep both brothers in her life without shattering them completely. But by the middle of the episode, it became obvious things were already breaking. Conrad and Jeremiah's relationship was hanging by a thread. Every time they spoke, it felt like a fight. Every time they looked at each other, you could feel the resentment burning. Jeremiah wanted Conrad to step aside, to admit he wasn't good for Belly. Conrad wanted Jeremiah to back off, to stop trying to steal the one thing he had left. Belly was right in the middle, and no matter how hard she tried to calm things down, she only made it worse. The climax of the episode came when emotions finally spilled over. Words that had been building up for episodes came crashing out, and suddenly, everything was laid bare. Conrad's anger, Jeremiah's frustration, Belly's guilt, it was all out in the open. And none of it could be taken back. By the end, the fragile balance they'd been clinging to was gone. Belly was left with tears, the boys were left with rage, and the house felt colder than ever. Episode 3 wasn't about little cracks anymore, it was about fractures. The kind you can't fix with a few apologies. The kind that change everything forever. By the time the credits rolled, you knew it, whatever came next wasn't going to heal them. It was going to break them even further. And the scariest part? Belly was the one holding the match, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Episode 4 didn't waste any time pretending things could calm down. By now, the walls everyone had built were crumbling, and every secret, every unspoken feeling, every grudge that had been brewing finally started to spill over. The air around them felt charged, heavy, like a storm waiting to hit. And this time, there was no escape, no chance to bury it under smiles or forced laughter. Episode 4 was about facing the truth, no matter how ugly it was, from the opening moments. You could see Belly's struggle written all over her. She was exhausted from carrying the weight of Conrad's silence and Jeremiah's steady presence. She had tried so hard to keep both relationships balanced, but the cracks were too wide now. Every choice she made, no matter how small, seemed to tilt the scale one way or the other. When she looked at Conrad, her heart still pulled toward him with that deep, aching connection. But when Jeremiah stepped in, offering the warmth and steadiness Conrad refused to give, Belly couldn't deny how safe she felt. The truth was cruel, her heart was divided, and no matter what she did, someone was going to get hurt. Conrad's behavior in this episode was like watching someone drown silently. He was breaking down in ways he refused to admit. His grief over Susanna wasn't just sadness anymore, it was rage, guilt, fear, all tangled into one. He snapped more easily, shut down more often, and every time Belly tried to reach him, he pulled back harder. But beneath the coldness, you could still catch those flashes, the way he looked at Belly when she wasn't watching, the way his voice cracked when he almost let his walls fall. It was clear he still loved her, maybe more than ever, but his love was wrapped in so much pain that he didn't know how to give it, without destroying himself in the process. Jeremiah, on the other hand, refused to let the silence swallow him. He confronted Conrad directly, and for the first time, their conflict wasn't just simmering under the surface, it was out in the open. Their arguments cut deep, every word a weapon, every accusation a scar. Jeremiah wanted Conrad to admit he wasn't what Belly needed anymore, that holding onto her was only hurting everyone. Conrad, in his own way, wanted Jeremiah to back off, to stop pushing into something that was his. The brothers weren't just fighting over Belly, they were fighting over their identity, their bond, their place in a world that Susanna had once held together for them. Without her, they were lost, and Belly became the center of that loss. Belly herself wasn't innocent in all this. She tried to play peacekeeper, tried to stop the fighting, but the harder she tried, the worse it got. Her guilt grew heavier because no matter how much she wanted to fix things, every choice she made only deepened the divide. She was caught in the eye of the storm, watching the people she loved the most tear each other apart, knowing that in some way, she was the reason it was happening. And the hardest truth? A part of her couldn't choose because she didn't want to. Episode 4 also gave us the clearest look yet at how fragile this group had become without Susanna. The house, once filled with her laughter and her warmth, felt colder, emptier, almost like it didn't belong to them anymore. Every memory of her only deepened the pain, and every attempt to pretend things were normal only made the absence louder. Taylor's voice cut through again, reminding Belly that she couldn't keep living in denial, that this triangle wasn't just hurting her, it was destroying everyone. But Belly's heart wasn't ready to let go, even when her head told her she had to. The turning point of the episode came when words turned into actions. Tension that had been building for 3 episodes finally snapped, and the fallout was brutal. Fights erupted, truths were shouted, and the delicate balance was shattered for good. Conrad and Jeremiah crossed lines they couldn't uncross. Belly was left in tears, and the summer that once promised healing now promised nothing but scars. By the end of episode 4, everything felt broken. The brothers were more divided than ever. Belly was left standing in the ruins of what she thought she could hold together, and the shadow of Susanna loomed heavier than ever before. The storm had finally hit, and the damage was done. There was no pretending anymore, no going back to the way things used to be. The only question left was what would be left standing when it was over. Episode 4 wasn't just emotional, it was destructive. It ripped away the last bits of comfort, the last threads of denial, and left everyone raw, exposed, and vulnerable. By the time the screen faded to black, you weren't just wondering what would happen next, you were terrified of it. Because if this was how bad things got in episode 4, then episode 5 promised to burn it all down completely. Episode 5 hit different. If the first 4 episodes were about building the storm, this one was the thunderclap. The lightning strike, the moment when everything that had been simmering finally boiled over. From the very first scene, you could tell the energy had shifted. The arguments weren't just sharp words anymore, they were final blows. The kind that cut so deep they couldn't be taken back. The tension wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. You could almost feel the walls of that house shaking under the weight of everything unsaid, everything hidden, and everything they had been too scared to face. Belly walked into this episode already carrying too much. Her heart was split clean down the middle and she was running out of excuses to hide it. Conrad's distance had left her bruised, but Jeremiah's steady presence was pulling her closer in ways she didn't want to admit. She wanted to believe she could keep both, that she didn't have to choose yet. But episode 5 made it clear time was up. Choices had to be made, and the fallout would be brutal no matter what. Belly's face showed it, the quiet panic in her eyes. The way her voice cracked when she tried to explain herself. She wasn't just fighting for love anymore, she was fighting to hold herself together. Conrad's behavior reached a peak here. He couldn't hide the cracks anymore. His grief, his guilt, his love for Belly, it all came spilling out. But not in the way anyone expected. His anger was sharp, his words cruel, but underneath, you could feel the desperation. He didn't know how to love without destroying, didn't know how to let go without falling apart. His moments with Belly were painful because even when he tried to push her away, his eyes betrayed him. He still wanted her, still needed her. But he didn't know how to give her anything without pulling her into his own darkness. Watching him was like watching someone drowning, reaching out for help one second, and pushing everyone away the next. Jeremiah, though, refused to let the chaos swallow him. In this episode, he stood taller, louder. More certain than ever before, he confronted Conrad directly, not just about Belly, but about everything, about the way Conrad shut down, about the way he hurt the people who cared about him, about the way he acted like he was the only one carrying Susanna's loss. Jeremiah's pain came pouring out, his anger, his frustration, but also his love for Belly, for his family, for everything Conrad seemed determined to destroy. And for the first time, Belly saw Jeremiah not just as the second choice, but as the brother who might actually know how to love her without breaking her. That realization cut deep because Belly's heart wasn't ready to admit it, but her soul felt it. The fights in this episode weren't quiet, they were loud, explosive. The kind of arguments that echoed long after the words were said. Conrad and Jeremiah's relationship was torn apart in front of Belly's eyes. And no matter how hard she tried to calm them, she only made it worse. Her pleas, her tears, they couldn't stitch the wound shut this time. The brothers had crossed a line, and nothing she said could erase it. The bond that had always been the foundation of their world was crumbling, and Belly was standing right in the middle of the wreckage, realizing she might have been the match that lit the fire. Episode 5 also made it impossible to ignore the shadow of Susanna. Every argument, every tear, every broken moment circled back to her. She had been the glue, the light, the reason they all held together. Without her, everything was falling apart. Belly's guilt was crushing. Was she honoring Susanna by loving Conrad? Was she betraying her by letting Jeremiah in? The questions ate at her. And no matter which way she turned, the answers only hurt. The climax of the episode was brutal. Words turned into confessions, confessions turned into betrayals, and betrayals turned into silence that cut deeper than any scream. Belly was left standing in pieces. Jeremiah's heart was laid bare, and Conrad was shattered in a way that felt permanent. By the end, the house that once held memories of love and laughter now felt like a graveyard, filled with ghosts of what used to be. Episode 5 didn't just push the story forward, it ripped it open. It forced everyone to face the truth. Nothing would ever be the same. Belly couldn't hide anymore. Conrad couldn't run anymore. Jeremiah couldn't wait anymore. And the summer that started with hope had turned into ashes. By the time the screen went black, you weren't asking who Belly would choose, you were asking how any of them would survive what came next. When the dust settled after episode 5, it didn't feel like peace, it felt like walking through the ruins of a battlefield. The shouting had stopped, but the silence was louder than anything. Every word that had been thrown, every confession, every tear, it still hung in the air like smoke. No one knew what to say because nothing felt right anymore. The damage was done. The love triangle wasn't just about Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah anymore. It had spilled over into every part of their lives, touching every wound they had tried to cover and tearing apart every fragile bond they had left. Belly woke up the next morning with eyes that told the whole story, puffy, red, heavy from crying too much and sleeping too little. She was exhausted. But it wasn't just her body, it was her soul. She felt like she had betrayed both brothers, even though she hadn't made a choice yet. The weight of her silence was just as heavy as if she had screamed out one of their names. Her guilt was eating her alive. Because she had come into the summer thinking it was going to be healing. Maybe even hopeful, but all she had done was rip open wounds that never fully closed after Susanna's death. Conrad wasn't himself either, his usual cold, controlled mask had cracked wide open in the last episode and now he was just a shell. He walked around the house like a ghost, avoiding everyone. Barely speaking, barely eating. Every time he caught Belly's eyes, he looked away like the sight of her burned. He wanted her, everyone knew it, but his love had turned into something twisted. Something he couldn't control, something that hurt both of them more than it healed. For the first time, you could see that even he knew he was losing her, not because she didn't love him, but because he didn't know how to hold on without breaking her in the process. Jeremiah, on the other hand, couldn't keep quiet. He was still furious. Furious at Conrad for acting like he was the only one who mattered. Furious at Belly for not being clear, for letting both of them hope. Furious at the universe for stealing Susanna, for throwing their whole world off balance. His anger was loud, but underneath it was heartbreak. You could see it in the way his voice cracked when he raised it, in the way his hands shook when he pointed at Conrad, in the way he looked at Belly when he thought no one was watching. Jeremiah wasn't just fighting for love, he was fighting to be seen, to not be pushed aside like he had been his whole life. The house felt heavier with each passing day. Meals were awkward, conversations short, and every time they were in the same room, it was like waiting for another explosion. No one knew when, but everyone knew it was coming, and through it all, Susanna's shadow lingered. Her absence was everywhere, in the empty seat at the table, in the quiet corners where her laughter used to fill the air, in the way her boys were tearing each other apart because she wasn't there to hold them together. Belly couldn't escape the thought that maybe Susanna would be disappointed in her. Maybe she had failed the one person who had loved her like a daughter. Episode 6 wasn't just about the triangle anymore, it was about the collapse of everything they thought was unshakable. Conrad and Jeremiah weren't just brothers, they were enemies now. Standing on opposite sides of a war neither of them wanted to fight, but both were too stubborn to walk away from. Belly was caught in the middle, bleeding from wounds she didn't even see coming, realizing too late that love wasn't enough to save any of them. And the scariest part, they all knew this wasn't the end. What happened in episode 5 was just the spark. The real fire was still coming. The choice Belly had been avoiding, the truth Conrad kept burying, the hope Jeremiah refused to let go of, it was all heading toward something final. Something that would burn brighter and harder than anything before. By the end of section 6, the suspense was clear. The question wasn't just who would Belly choose. The question was, after all this damage, would any of them be left standing when it was over? By the time the chaos of episode 5 had sunk in, the house was no longer a safe place. It wasn't a home filled with laughter and memories, it was a pressure cooker. Every wall holding in secrets, heartbreak, and anger that threatened to explode all over again. What made it worse was the quiet, not the kind of quiet that brought peace, but the kind that made you feel like you were being watched. Like the next sentence you spoke could set someone off. Nobody trusted each other anymore, not even themselves. And that mistrust was spreading faster than anyone could stop it. Belly was crumbling on the inside. She kept telling herself she was strong enough to handle it, that if she just stayed calm, if she just kept everyone together, they'd find their way back to each other. But she was lying to herself. She was running out of smiles, running out of apologies, running out of the energy it took to pretend she wasn't breaking. Every time she tried to talk to Conrad, he shut her down with his silence. Every time she tried to comfort Jeremiah, he pushed back with his anger. No matter which way she turned, she was the problem in their eyes. And the guilt was swallowing her whole. Conrad was slipping deeper into his own storm. He thought shutting everyone out would protect him, would protect them, but all it did was make him colder. He started retreating into himself, hiding away in corners of the house, drowning in books or staring at the ocean like he was searching for answers in the waves. But the truth was, he was scared of losing Belly, scared of losing his brother, scared of admitting that maybe he had already lost both. His silence wasn't strength, it was fear dressed up as distance, and Belly felt it, Jeremiah felt it. Everyone felt it. Jeremiah refused to let things sit, his anger was still hot. And he wasn't going to let Conrad's silence go unchallenged. Every time they crossed paths, it turned into another confrontation, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet but sharp, like daggers in the dark. Jeremiah was done being the second choice, done being overlooked. For once, he wanted to be the one who mattered most, and he was willing to fight for it. The problem was, his fight didn't just push against Conrad, it also cornered Belly. His love for her was real, but the way it came out now felt desperate, almost demanding. Like he couldn't see that she was already drowning. The triangle was no longer just about who loved Belly more. It was about control, about pride, about old wounds that had never healed. Susanna's death had left a hole in their lives, and instead of filling it with love, they were filling it with blame. Every moment felt heavier because of her absence. What would she say if she saw them like this? Would she be angry, disappointed, heartbroken? Belly couldn't shake the thought that Susanna's dream of love and family was crumbling in real time, right in front of her. The unraveling wasn't loud this time, it was subtle. Little glances, long silences, unspoken words that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Belly noticed Jeremiah's eyes on her every time Conrad walked into the room. She noticed Conrad's shoulders tense every time Jeremiah spoke her name. She noticed herself breaking down in the middle of it, wondering if maybe the problem wasn't them. Maybe it was her. Maybe she had been selfish all along, thinking she could love two people at once without destroying both. But the truth was, she wasn't the only one breaking. Jeremiah's hope was starting to look more like desperation. Conrad's silence was starting to look more like surrender. And the house was starting to feel like a cage, trapping them all in their own pain. Episode 7 wasn't about healing, it was about watching cracks turn into fault lines. About realizing that nothing was holding them together anymore, except for the fragile thread of the past, and that thread was wearing thin. By the end of the stretch, you could feel it in the air, something bigger was coming. Something final. The fights weren't over, the choices weren't made, and the heartbreak wasn't finished. The unraveling had only just begun, and once the thread finally snapped, there would be no putting it back together. By the time things reached this stage, there was no pretending anymore. The cracks that had been spreading slowly were now wide open, and the truth had no choice but to come out. Secrets that had been whispered, feelings that had been buried, promises that had been broken, it all started spilling into the open, and once it did, there was no stopping it. Belly was the first one to break. She couldn't carry the weight of silence any longer. Her guilt, her confusion, her fear of choosing wrong, it all came tumbling out in a flood of words she couldn't control. She admitted to loving them both, admitted to being torn, admitted that every choice felt like betrayal. And as the words left her mouth, you could see the devastation in their eyes. For Conrad, it was like confirmation of his worst fear, that she loved Jeremiah as much as she loved him. For Jeremiah, it was both hope and heartbreak, because she admitted the feelings were real, but also that she wasn't choosing him outright. Belly thought telling the truth would set her free, but all it did was set the house on fire. Conrad lashed out the only way he knew how, with anger that covered up his pain. He threw sharp words at Jeremiah, words that cut deeper than knives. He accused him of waiting in the shadows, of taking advantage of moments when Conrad wasn't around, of being the kind of brother who couldn't stand on his own unless he was taking what Conrad had. The words weren't fair, but they came from a place of fear and loss. Conrad wasn't just losing Belly, he was losing his grip on everything. And Jeremiah was the easiest target to blame. Jeremiah didn't back down this time. He stood his ground, his voice loud, his chest heavy with years of being second best. He reminded Conrad of every time he had stepped aside, every time he had swallowed his own feelings for the sake of peace, every time Conrad had been handed everything while Jeremiah had been told to wait his turn. This time, he wasn't waiting anymore. He told Conrad straight up that he loved Belly, that he wasn't ashamed of it, and that for once in his life, he was going to fight for what he wanted. The look in his eyes said it all. Jeremiah wasn't playing second anymore. The betrayal wasn't just about Belly, it was about the brothers themselves. They weren't just fighting over a girl. They were ripping open old wounds that had been festering since childhood. Resentments, jealousies, unspoken truths, it all came pouring out, and it was ugly. Years of love and brotherhood were crumbling right in front of Belly's eyes. And she couldn't stop it. Her tears didn't matter, her pleas didn't matter. They were too far gone, and in the middle of it all, the ghost of Susanna hung heavier than ever. Her absence was like a wound that never closed. And everything they said to each other circled back to her. They weren't just grieving her, they were destroying each other in her name. Would she have wanted this? Would she have begged them to stop? Belly knew the answer, but saying it out loud didn't change anything. The betrayal went both ways. Conrad felt betrayed by Belly's honesty. Jeremiah felt betrayed by years of being overshadowed. And Belly felt betrayed by both of them for dragging her heart through a war she never wanted to fight. And the scariest part? They weren't even done yet. Every word only opened the door for more. Every confession only made the silence afterward more unbearable. Episode 8 wasn't about choices, it was about truths too raw to take back. About realizing that love wasn't enough, not when pride, grief, and jealousy were standing in the way. The love triangle was no longer just messy, it was destructive, and everyone in it was bleeding. By the time the shouting faded, there was nothing left but broken pieces. They had all said too much, done too much, crossed too many lines. The question hanging in the air wasn't just who Belly would choose. It was whether there would be anything left of their family when she finally did. By the time everything spilled out, there was no way to patch it up. The damage had already gone too far. The air was thick with words they couldn't take back, with truths they couldn't unhear, with feelings that had cut deeper than any fight they'd ever had before. What once was a bond between brothers, a bond that had survived childhood, heartbreak, and even grief, was now split wide open. And Belly, standing in the middle, realized she wasn't just part of a love triangle anymore, she was standing in the middle of a collapse. Conrad walked away from it all like a man who had finally given up. His silence wasn't protective anymore, it was heavy, final. He stopped trying to fight, stopped trying to explain, stopped trying to hold on to something that was slipping away no matter what he did. There was a look in his eyes that said he was done. Not with love, not with Belly, not even with Jeremiah, but with hope. For Conrad, hope had turned into pain, and letting go felt easier than holding on. Watching him retreat into that shell was brutal, because it was like watching someone disappear in plain sight. He was there, but he wasn't really there anymore. Jeremiah, on the other hand, carried his anger like armor. Every move he made was sharp, every word he spoke was edged with bitterness. He had finally said everything he had held back for years, and it left him raw, exposed. But instead of feeling lighter, he felt heavier. Because now the truth was out there and he couldn't hide behind silence anymore. He had told Belly he loved her, he had told Conrad he wasn't stepping aside again. And now the weight of those confessions was pressing down on him. Jeremiah wasn't second anymore, but being first didn't feel as good as he thought it would. It felt lonely, messy, and dangerous. And Belly was drowning. Every time she tried to choose the right words, they turned into the wrong ones. Every time she tried to comfort one brother, she broke the other. She thought honesty would set her free, but instead it left her trapped in a cage she built herself. The guilt was unbearable because no matter what she did, someone was going to be shattered. And deep down, she started to realize that maybe she wasn't just breaking them, maybe she was breaking herself too. The collapse wasn't just about the three of them. The whole house felt it. The walls carried the tension, the silence echoed louder than laughter ever had. The memories of summers past, the bonfires, the late-night talks. The gentle touches all felt like ghosts now, haunting every corner. This wasn't the house of love and comfort anymore. It was the house of loss. Susanna's presence was almost unbearable now. Belly could hear her voice in her head, could imagine the way she would have pulled the boys into a hug, reminded them that love wasn't meant to destroy. But Susanna wasn't there. And that was the cruelest part of all. Without her, they were lost children pretending to be grown, tearing each other apart because they didn't know how else to deal with the pain. The choices were coming closer now. Everyone felt it. Belly couldn't keep stalling. Conrad couldn't keep running. Jeremiah couldn't keep demanding. The summer had started with light, but now it was ending in shadows. And the collapse wasn't just emotional, it was final. The love triangle was no longer just a question of who Belly would choose. It had turned into a question of survival. Would their relationship survive? Would their family survive? Would they survive themselves? By the end of this stretch, it was clear there was no way back. Whatever came next would decide everything. And no matter how it played out, someone was going to be left in pieces. The end wasn't neat. It wasn't tied up with vows or wrapped in promises. It was messy, it was brutal, and it left scars that would never heal. Episode 10 didn't give anyone the comfort of closure, it gave them the reality of heartbreak. Because sometimes love doesn't fix everything. Sometimes love is the thing that destroys you. She noticed Conrad's shoulders tense every time Jeremiah spoke her name. She noticed herself breaking down in the middle of it, wondering if maybe the problem wasn't them. Maybe it was her. Maybe she had been selfish all along, thinking she could love two people at once without destroying both. But the truth was, she wasn't the only one breaking. Jeremiah's hope was starting to look more like desperation. Conrad's silence was starting to look more like surrender. And the house was starting to feel like a cage, trapping them all in their own pain. Episode 7 wasn't about healing, it was about watching cracks turn into fault lines. About realizing that nothing was holding them together anymore, except for the fragile thread of the past, and that thread was wearing thin. By the end of this stretch, you could feel it in the air, something bigger was coming. Something final. The fights weren't over, the choices weren't made, and the heartbreak wasn't finished. The unraveling had only just begun, and once the thread finally snapped, there would be no putting it back together. By the time things reached this stage, there was no pretending anymore. The cracks that had been spreading slowly were now wide open, and the truth had no choice but to come out. Secrets that had been whispered, feelings that had been buried, promises that had been broken. It all started spilling into the open, and once it did, there was no stopping it. Belly was the first one to break. She couldn't carry the weight of silence any longer. Her guilt, her confusion, her fear of choosing wrong, it all came tumbling out in a flood of words she couldn't control. She admitted to loving them both, admitted to being torn, admitted that every choice felt like betrayal. And as the words left her mouth, you could see the devastation in their eyes. For Conrad, it was like confirmation of his worst fear, that she loved Jeremiah as much as she loved him. For Jeremiah, it was both hope and heartbreak, because she admitted the feelings were real, but also that she wasn't choosing him outright. Belly thought telling the truth would set her free, but all it did was set the house on fire. Conrad lashed out the only way he knew how, with anger that covered up his pain. He threw sharp words at Jeremiah, words that cut deeper than knives. He accused him of waiting in the shadows, of taking advantage of moments when Conrad wasn't around, of being the kind of brother who couldn't stand on his own unless he was taking what Conrad had. The words weren't fair, but they came from a place of fear and loss. Conrad wasn't just losing Belly, he was losing his grip on everything. And Jeremiah was the easiest target to blame. Jeremiah didn't back down this time. He stood his ground, his voice loud, his chest heavy with years of being second best. He reminded Conrad of every time he had stepped aside, every time he had swallowed his own feelings for the sake of peace, every time Conrad had been handed everything while Jeremiah had been told to wait his turn. This time, he wasn't waiting anymore. He told Conrad straight up that he loved Belly, that he wasn't ashamed of it, and that for once in his life, he was going to fight for what he wanted. The look in his eyes said it all. Jeremiah wasn't playing second anymore. The betrayal wasn't just about Belly, it was about the brothers themselves. They weren't just fighting over a girl. They were ripping open old wounds that had been festering since childhood. Resentments, jealousies, unspoken truths, it all came pouring out, and it was ugly. Years of love and brotherhood were crumbling right in front of Belly's eyes. And she couldn't stop it. Her tears didn't matter, her pleas didn't matter. They were too far gone, and in the middle of it all, the ghost of Susanna hung heavier than ever. Her absence was like a wound that never closed. And everything they said to each other circled back to her. They weren't just grieving her, they were destroying each other in her name. Would she have wanted this? Would she have begged them to stop? Belly knew the answer, but saying it out loud didn't change anything. The betrayal went both ways. Conrad felt betrayed by Belly's honesty. Jeremiah felt betrayed by years of being overshadowed. And Belly felt betrayed by both of them for dragging her heart through a war she never wanted to fight. And the scariest part? They weren't even done yet. Every word only opened the door for more. Every confession only made the silence afterward more unbearable. Episode 8 wasn't about choices, it was about truths too raw to take back. About realizing that love wasn't enough, not when pride, grief, and jealousy were standing in the way. The love triangle was no longer just messy, it was destructive, and everyone in it was bleeding. By the time the shouting faded, there was nothing left but broken pieces. They had all said too much, done too much, crossed too many lines. The question hanging in the air wasn't just who Belly would choose. It was whether there would be anything left of their family when she finally did. By the time everything spilled out, there was no way to patch it up. The damage had already gone too far. The air was thick with words they couldn't take back, with truths they couldn't unhear, with feelings that had cut deeper than any fight they'd ever had before. What once was a bond between brothers, a bond that had survived childhood, heartbreak, and even grief, was now split wide open. And Belly, standing in the middle, realized she wasn't just part of a love triangle anymore, she was. Belly stood at the center of it all, finally realizing that no matter which way she turned, someone was going to be shattered. Jeremiah's eyes burned with hope, Conrad's eyes drowned in grief, and her own heart was torn clean down the middle. She wanted to choose both, but choosing both meant choosing no one. She wanted to choose neither, but choosing neither meant admitting the summer was nothing but pain. The weight of that decision pressed down on her chest like a stone, and you could see it in her face, the exhaustion, the sorrow, the realization that love wasn't the fairy tale she thought it would be. Conrad gave us the quiet heartbreak. He didn't yell this time, didn't fight, didn't argue. He simply looked at her, eyes filled with every memory they ever shared. And you could see him letting go. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much to keep breaking her. His silence said everything. If you love him, choose him. Don't let me ruin you anymore. For Conrad, this wasn't surrender, it was sacrifice. The kind that leaves you bleeding inside but makes you walk away anyway. Jeremiah, though, wouldn't let go. His love wasn't quiet, it was loud, desperate, burning. He reached for Belly like she was the only thing keeping him alive, and in a way, she was. Every word out of his mouth carried the same plea: choose me. Please, just choose me. And you could feel his heart beating through every syllable. a rawness that made it impossible to ignore. Jeremiah wasn't offering calm. He was offering passion. But passion isn't always enough. Sometimes it burns too hot, and all that's left are ashes. The house, the summer, the memories, they all felt like they were slipping away. Belly could hear Susanna in her mind, could see her smile in every room. And that only made the decision harder. Because Susanna wanted love, wanted happiness, wanted peace. And Belly knew, deep down, that no matter what choice she made, peace was already gone. When the moment finally came, Belly's voice shook. Whether she chose Jeremiah or Conrad or no one at all, it didn't matter. Because the truth was the same, something was lost forever. The triangle had burned too hot, the pain had cut too deep. And the summer that once felt endless had finally ended. What came next wasn't joy. It was survival. The screen faded with silence, not answers. And that silence was louder than any words could ever be, because at the end of the day, The Summer I Turned Pretty wasn't just about first loves or heartbreaks. It was about how fragile we really are when love, grief, and time collide. It was about how growing up doesn't give you clarity, it gives you choices. And sometimes those choices break you. So here's the real question: after all the tears, all the fights, all the heartbreak, who truly won? Conrad, Jeremiah? Or was it nobody at all? And if you've been writing this story with me, if you've been caught up in the heartbreak, the chaos, and the suspense, then don't miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and stay locked in, boss. Because season 2 breakdowns are right around the corner. And trust me, you don't want to miss it.